Welcome to Ask SME Anything. Your chance to ask the ITProTV subject matter experts questions live. Here's your host, Ronnie Wong.
All right, and welcome to Ask Me Anything. It is a show from ITProTV where, you get to interact with us, the subject matter experts right here on ITProTV. We are glad that you've joined us today as we begin our segment today as well. And I have with me, of course, Mr. Mike Roderick himself. Mike, glad you're here with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ronnie. Thanks for having me. Excited, as always, to participate in the old Ask Me Anything.
Yeah, this is actually a great opportunity for everyone as we think about it, right? So if you're out there and you're watching, you don't have to be a member, of course. All you have to do, if you have any IT-related questions, please submit them. And all you have to do is tweet to Ask Me Anything, and we'll get our subject matter experts, of course, to go ahead and try and answer them for you so that we actually do cover what we can. And if it actually does apply to what we're talking about today, we'll get Mike to actually answer them for us today as well.
I was going to say, let's be careful with the Ask Me Anything within my field.
Okay, so that limits it down to soap operas, and
right.
No, I'm joking. Okay, so overall though, Mike Roderick, of course, as we start talking here, I've known Mike for over a decade, and Mike, an expert in all things just about Microsoft here. So take a look, of course, at Windows Server and, of course, the client operating systems as well as networking and security. He's done the whole gamut, and he likes to dabble, of course, in PowerShell. So we're focusing around those questions in that way when we start to take a look. But please don't hesitate. If you do have other questions, we do have other subject matter experts. So please go ahead and submit them as we do so, as we continue through the show. And this is what we'll actually be taking a look at and doing. So, Mike, as we begin, we've already got some questions that have been lined up for us. So that means we are ready to jump right in. How do you feel about answering some questions right away?
I'm ready to go. Let's get to it.
Yeah? All right. Well, the first question that we have, of course, as we get started here is, hey, I want to actually be able to use PowerShell to administer Active Directory. Okay, there are so many commands. Where should I start? Now, Mike, when I think about this, I can kind of understand the frustration that they're talking about, because this is kind of the big push, right? The idea of moving to PowerShell when everybody's been so used to the GUI now for since at least 2000. Okay, the idea of this, and now people are starting to go, no, PowerShell is the way to go, and this has been a big push at least since 2012. But if you're just getting into it now, you're probably wondering why and where the heck do we start?
It is. It can be very daunting because, as the viewer asked, there are a lot of commands. Microsoft has great documentation. First of all, let me just say that if you go out to docs.microsoft.com, I'll show you a trick that I do here. If you take a look at my screen, I'm just going to open up my browser, and I'm going to type in a command that I know: get-ad user. All right. Just a PowerShell command. And I see a link right here, get-ad user out to Microsoft Docs. I click on that, and that gets me in the right ballpark. Right now I'm in Microsoft Docs, I'm in PowerShell, and even if that wasn't the command that I wanted, I can scroll through this list and I can find really good documentation on the different commands that are available. So that's a good place to have reference. Bookmark Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 PowerShell have that reference available. But as far as getting started, what I would recommend is think about what it is that you do. What is it that we typically use PowerShell in an administrative fashion to automate certain tasks? Things that I normally have to do that going through the GUI is okay, but if I could do this with a script, if I could work through PowerShell, I could start automating some of this, creating new users, creating OUs, whatever the case may be. So what I would recommend is taking advantage of something that a lot of people are unaware of. We've got the new administrative tool for Active Directory, the Windows or the Active Directory Administrative Center, right, which is a GUI-based tool for administering Active Directory. What a lot of people don't realize is there's a feature in there called the Windows or the PowerShell history. And what it'll do is it'll show you what commands are being executed. Because unlike our old GUI tools, like Active Directory users and computers, Active Directory sites and services, things like that are using various protocols to complete those commands, the Active Directory Administrative Center is really a GUI front end for PowerShell. What's happening is when you right-click in that GUI and you say New User, and you fill in the information, you click OK, what it's doing is it's actually executing a PowerShell command in the background. And the PowerShell history will let you see the command. that's being executed. And now you can go, oh, that's the command I would have used to create a new user. And you can start learning the syntax that way rather than just try to read through Microsoft Docs and looking at the tons of commands that are out there. It's a way to really focus in on what it is that you do. So use the Administrative Center to perform a task and then look at that history. In fact, let's take a look at my screen. I'll show you what I mean. I'll pull up one of my domain controllers here. And from the Server Manager, simply going to launch the Active Directory Administrative Center. Get that going here. And I'm going to go, let's see what we want to do here. Let's just say I want to go into my employees sales OU, and I want to make a new user. So I don't know the PowerShell command to do that or all the parameters that are required to do that. So I'm going to use the GUI to accomplish that. So over here, I'm going to go underneath sales, new, and user. And easy enough, I can see the red asterisks are telling me what the required parameters are. I'll fill this out. Let's see, Ronnie, last name, Wong, and I'll give you a logon name of Ronnie. Give you a super secret password. So fill out all the required information and any other information that you typically use in your company. If you fill out things like department and job title, if you fill that information out in your organization, go ahead and do so. In fact, let's put department host. We'll put, or let's do this. Let's say department. Let's do a job title and we'll say edutainer. All right. And so go through here, fill out the information, and go ahead and click OK to create that user. So now I see I should have Ronnie Wong, new user right there. Down here at the very bottom, Windows PowerShell history. There's a little chevron hidden over here in the corner. And if I click that, I'll actually see, and let me drag this up a little bit so you can get a better look at it. Here are the commands that were issued to create that user. I can see it right here, and I'll zoom in a little bit for us. New -AD user. Right, and I got -department was null because I didn't provide the department. You can see display name, given name, and the various parameters that were used. What path, right, which is where to create it. And let me zoom out. That's getting a little clunky with the video feed here. And I can expand this out, and I can see it in a little better view, all the different parameters that were provided. Right? And so what I can do from here is I can actually copy this command out. Right? We can click copy. Actually, if I select something, then I click copy, I could take that over to PowerShell, right? And I could paste that in there. And now I could start writing a script, taking out maybe specific information, starting to replace it with variables, starting to automate that process. And what you'll see is that it now gives you a chance to, okay, this is something that I do on a daily basis or pretty often. I want to go back out to Microsoft Docs and read a little more about new -AD user. That's a command I want to get familiar with. And then I see like set -AD account password. Oh, so that's telling me that I wasn't able to set this with the new -AD user. It's actually a separate command I use to set the password. Then I have to enable the account. These are things that I might not have thought about because I've always used the GUI to do this. And now I want to start using PowerShell. This is what's going to show you how to do that. Set the account control and then setting the AD users. These are all commands that were issued to create that user that we did through the GUI. So what I would recommend then, like I said, is use Microsoft documentation. They have great documentation out there. There's great help built into PowerShell. But rather than just start at the beginning and try to go through every command, think about the things that you do and focus in on that at first. And then you'll slowly round out your PowerShell skills by adding additional commands. Next time I go back and I create a new organizational unit, right? And I fill that information in here and I go ahead and create that. And now I go back down in my PowerShell history and I can see, if we refresh here, new -AD organizational unit, and I can start learning that command. So take advantage of that PowerShell history in this tool, the Active Directory Administrative Center. That's a good place to start.
Yeah, Mike, I think some of the misunderstanding that we have when we want to start trying to administer with PowerShell is not understanding its purpose. So the idea of scripting, especially for automating those tasks, is a good reminder for us to think about, as well as the idea of actually testing it out and playing with it and trying to make sure that we get into it. It's easy to kind of go, okay, I understand the concept, but to actually do it. Now, I don't recommend you do this on a production server if you're doing this, especially if somebody's watching it. but do take the time to at least test it out and see what happens.
Yeah, and it can be daunting, right? If you go out to Microsoft Docs and you look up that command, new-80 user, you're going to see dozens and dozens of parameters that you can use. They're not all required, but looking at that documentation can be overwhelming. Oh my gosh, how much do I have to actually type in? When in the end, there's just very few parameters that are actually required. So the documentation, if that's a little scary for you, start with that administrative center and go from there.
Yeah, that history seems to be a great way to at least see the syntax when you're not exactly sure how the syntax works, and then replacing it with variables, like you said, is taking it to the next level, and that way you start seeing the power of it right away instead of you having to read and like, what's this option for? That's where I get a little bit messed up at times, is when I think about, should I include this or should I not include this? Well, Mike is showing you just by using the GUI is helping you to at least see the minimum that you might want to do. And then, of course, well, you can max it out by filling in every possible blank that there is, and that will help us out too, okay? So, Mike, that's a great way for us to actually think about beginning here, okay? As we start to continue on, of course, in the realm of Active Directory and administration and different things, there are some other questions that have come up, and we have our next one ready. What do you think, Mike? Ready?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So here's our next question that we have ready to go. What are the FSMO roles? I don't know why I have a hard time saying that. And why should I even care? So, Mike, what this sounds like when I'm starting to see this is maybe at this point, this particular person that submitted this, they may be studying and trying to understand the idea of building Active Directory up. And they've come across this idea of these FSMO roles. I always say them backward for one reason or another. And now they're not really understanding. So, Mike, kind of give us that overview of what we need to know, and then answer his question. Why the heck should I care about it?
Yeah, and that's typically, you're right on when you say somebody's probably studying for an exam, because that's really where we see this more often than not, because it is something we don't have to think about all the time when we're administering our Active Directory domains. But it is important that we understand the concepts and we understand what they are, because it can affect us as soon as we start moving to multiple domain controllers, multiple domains, and then we start upgrading or replacing domain controllers. Maybe you're upgrading that hardware, you're building up a new machine. Very important that we understand these roles. And Windows is really good about warning us nowadays. It wasn't the case, back in 2000 and 2003. But let's start by defining that, right? FSMO is a flexible single master operations. That's what that's going to stand for. And when we talk about Active Directory, one of the great things about Active Directory is it uses what they call multi-master with loose convergence.
Yeah, you just overwhelmed somebody.
fancy term for saying that there is no one domain controller that's any more important than the others, right? If we go back to the NT days, you had primary domain controllers and backup domain controllers. And that primary domain controller was the only writable copy of Active Directory. If you wanted multiple domain controllers for fault tolerance, for load balancing, you added additional BDCs or backup domain controllers, and those gave you that fault tolerance and that load balancing capability, but they were read-only. They couldn't take any changes. You couldn't change passwords. One of the BDCs, it could still answer queries, authenticate logon attempts, things like that. And the reason for this was because of conflicts. I didn't want administrators from two different domain controllers making changes to the same objects and making, Ronnie set a phone number to 555-1212. I set the same user's phone number on a different domain controller to 555-1313. And now when we replicate, which change do we keep? So to solve that, they simply made one copy writable. That way changes could only be made on that primary domain controller. But that became very limiting. If that primary domain controller was down, then no changes could be made until we got that guy back up. So it became a very single point of failure type scenario. When we went into Server 2000 and Active Directory as we know it today, we got the what they call the multi-master, right? We have ways of dealing with replication conflicts, and I can now have all my domain controllers being writable. There isn't a primary domain controller anymore and then backup domain controllers, which is great, except there are a few things that the risk is too great. right? Because we can still end up with conflict. Now that we have multiple writable copies, there can be a conflict, right? This is just like I was describing a minute ago. And for most things, Active Directory has ways of dealing with those conflicts, last writer wins type thing, which one was the update server, which one was the update done on, timestamp. We can use that to solve most conflicts. There are some things, however, that we really don't want to take a chance with. And those are known as the single master operation roles. These are things that while most domain controllers can do everything, there are certain things that only one domain controller is going to be allowed to do. There's 5 FSMOs in Windows Active Directory as of now. There's see if I can remember all of these, Ronnie. The schema master, the domain naming master, the relative identifier master or the RID master, the infrastructure master, and the PDC emulator, right? There's 5 of those guys. 2 of them are what we call forest-wide roles. There's the schema master and the domain naming master. And what that means is only one domain controller in the entire forest is the schema master. The schema master is where we can make changes to the schema. Remember, the schema applies to all domains within the forest, no matter how many domains there are. And again, there's only one writable copy because I cannot take a chance on there being any conflicts, any 2 administrators making changes to the schema on 2 different domain controllers and then trying to figure out what to keep and what to throw away. We can't take that chance. So the schema master is one of the FSMOs. The domain naming master is also forest-wide, meaning there's only one domain naming master in the entire forest. The other 3, the PDC emulator, the RID master, and the infrastructure master, those 3 are domain-wide roles, meaning that there's one domain controller in each domain that holds that role. Domain A has its own PDC emulator, RID master, and infrastructure master. And there's only one of each of those in that domain. But domain B has its own PDC emulator, RID master, and infrastructure master. Only one in that domain, but each domain has its own. And that's what we mean by domain-wide roles. All right. Now, we could spend hours, Ronnie, talking about what each one of these roles does, how important they are, and things like that. And if you want more information about those, make sure you jump in our library and check out our courses where we talk about that. Here, I think what this really question is asking is, why should I be concerned with these roles? And the answer is because of the fact that they are single master operations. And you'll hear them called different things, FSMOs, single master operations, single operation roles. They all really referring to the same thing. The reason it's important is because what if the domain controller, let's say I have a domain controller that failed, and that domain controller happened to be holding one of those single master operation roles. That means now I don't have one of those, right? If the PDC emulator failed, now my domain does not have a PDC emulator. And it's a very important role. Again, check out our library and we'll talk about all of the things that that particular role does. So this is why it's important to understand what these roles are and being able to identify which domain controllers are holding them and paying attention to that. So if I need to bring a machine down, because we're going to do a hardware update on it, we're going to change hardware out or make a new domain controller. If the old domain controller is holding one of those roles, I need to move that role off before I remove Active Directory from it. Now, like I said, Windows is pretty good about warning us nowadays. If you go to demote a domain controller and it happens to have one of those roles on it, it'll warn you. It'll say, hey, do you want me to migrate this role, or this particular server has this role on it? You need to move it before. And it'll even do it for you, if I'm not mistaken, if another domain controller is available. So that's the main thing with those roles, and why I should care is because they do very important functions in our domain. For example, the PDC emulator handles password changes and password synchronizations. And if that's unavailable, some of our older clients might not be able to update passwords, right? The RID master generates the relative identifiers so that when I create new objects in Active Directory, I have a unique number to assign to generate the SID for that object. Well, if that RID master is down, we'll eventually run out of RIDs, and I go to create a new object. We'll try to reach out and talk to the RID master and say, hey, give me some more RIDs so I can create more objects, and the server's not available. I won't be able to create any more objects in Active Directory. It'll stop working. So understanding what machines are holding these roles and being able to move them if I need to is very important. Like I said, it's something that we really, 90% of the time, it's like you don't see it, you don't even think about it. It just does what it's supposed to do. But when you start making changes to your infrastructure, moving things around, we've got to be aware of where those roles are.
All right, Mike, thank you for answering that because it is a confusing bit of knowledge if you're really just starting to study it and you're getting into it and you're seeing all these descriptions of what each one of those single master roles does. Trying to get it to fit all into that idea of why it's important is a big part of us at least understand the concept of how Active Directory works and is so flexible in the way that it is. All right, Mike, there's another question that is out there and waiting for us as well. And it seems like we're staying into the certification realm again because, well, actually, this could be more practical at the same time because you might see this as well. The very fact is we have a question that says, what is the difference between a domain admin and an enterprise admin? Now, I can understand this one too from both sides, right? If I'm studying for the exam, I may said, and I read this, I'm like, okay, so what's the big deal between them? But in a real production scenario, I might see that I go and try and do something, and it says I need enterprise admin permissions. I go, wait a minute, I'm a domain admin. I have rights to everything. So what is this here, and what are we actually taking a look at in terms of the differences?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rylan. And it just like Ronnie said, that's typically what's going to happen is you're going to be trying to do something, and it's going to tell you you don't have permissions to do it. And you're logged on as the domain admin, and you start banging your head against the desk going, what do you mean I don't have permissions? I am the highest. There's nothing higher than me. I'm the domain admin. And that's not true. There actually is a group that has more authority than domain admins. And really, in a lot of environments, especially today, we don't see as many multi-domain forests as we used to. But that's not to say that they're not out there. When we think about the domain admin, it is true that is the Uber account, right? It can do anything within a domain, but that domain is the boundary, the limit of that domain admin's rights. If we get outside of that domain, the domain admin has no rights. In a forest, remember, a forest is a collection of domains under the same administration. All the domains within that forest share the same schema, for example. And an enterprise admin actually has rights across the entire forest. So if I have domain A and domain B in my forest, and I'm a domain admin in domain A, I have no administrative rights in domain B. And if I try to do something in domain B, I'm not going to be able to because I don't have administrative rights over there. If I try to do something in my domain that could affect other domains in the forest, I might be within my domain, so I'm domain admin, I should be able to do anything. But if what I get ready to do could potentially affect other domains in the enterprise, in the forest, it's going to stop me because my rights as a domain admin stop in my domain. And it's not going to let me do anything that is going to affect other domains. That's when you need to be an enterprise admin. An enterprise admin has full control over the entire forest, can do anything that would affect multiple domains. Like if we start linking group policies to a site can span domain boundaries. You need to be an enterprise admin to do that. You want to make changes to the schema, for example. That is something that is shared by all domains in the forest. So I need to be an enterprise admin to make those changes. I actually need a few more rights than that, but enterprise admin would be a good start. So that's the difference there between domain admin and enterprise admin. And the reason I think a lot of us don't realize that at first is we're in a single domain environment. And so the domain admin is able to do anything it wants, and there's never really a question. But as soon as you move to a multi-domain environment, if you have a forest that has more than one domain, now all of a sudden that enterprise admin accounts becomes very important because of the fact, and really even in a single domain environment, if you want to make changes to the schema, for example, you're going to have to be in the enterprise admins group because even though you don't have another domain, what you're doing could potentially affect more than one domain. So it is going to verify or valid or require that you have those enterprise admin rights. So this is a group that you want to be really careful with too. It's found in your root domain, the first domain you create in your forest, and you want to really control the membership to that group because, like I said, they can do something that can affect the entire forest. So very few people, in fact, a lot of times will add people to that group temporarily. And then when they're done doing whatever it is, like if you're installing an exchange, which is going to make changes to the schema, you need enterprise admin rights. I might add Ronnie to that enterprise admin group so that he can get that job done. Once he confirms that he's finished it and he no longer needs that role, I'll remove him from that group. I won't leave him in there because it is such a, what's a good word for it? That account can do so much. So many rights.
Yeah, it's since you mentioned it, right? The idea that we start off in that single domain, I think, is probably the context, like you said, that most of us are actually dealing with. So in this instance, when you talk about the limitation of this, if that is the nature of my domain at this point, in other words, I only have one domain, I don't have anything else in that forest except for that one domain, shouldn't I be an enterprise admin anyways then?
Yes, yeah, and typically, like if you, what I would recommend is you have an account that you add to that group that's not your daily driver, right? It's
Okay.
not what you log on with, and you put an account in there, and very few people should have the password to that account if you really want to leave somebody in that group. And like you said, in a single domain environment, if you're the only IT person, there's one or two people that are managing your forest or in your Active Directory environment, then maybe you do leave yourself in that group, and you don't have to worry about adding yourself every time you want to do something. You shouldn't be logging on with that account, obviously. We're going to follow best practices, and every admin should have a standard user account, and we do the run as. And then you're careful with, again, who has that password. I wouldn't put the built-in domain administrator account in that group because typically most of the IT staff has that particular password. So you just want to be careful with it. Understand that account has all the rights to do whatever it wants, and you just have to be cautious and audit.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The idea of actually understanding the power and the nature of what this account can do is something that we probably don't deal with on a daily basis and only in special occasions. But speaking of that, we have a follow-up question, at least what seems like a follow-up question here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our next question is going to be as well. And so it's not exactly the same user, but notice this. I'm an enterprise admin. Why can't I make changes to the schema? Now, you just said that, hey, you want to make changes to the schema, you got to be in the enterprise admins group. Here it is.
Very good, David. It's like you're reading my mind. And yes, that's you're in the enterprise admins group. So now we've solved that problem. I'm not just a domain admin. I'm an enterprise admin. That means I can make changes that would affect the entire forest. I should be able to make changes to the schema. Well, the schema is very, very protected. And while as an enterprise admin, you do have full control over the entire forest, the schema still has one more layer of protection because the schema is the blueprints for the objects that I can create in Active Directory. It's what defines, what a user is, what parameters or what properties an OU has, and much more. So making change to the schema can break lots of things very easily. So it's got this extra layer of security. There's another security group built into Active Directory known as the schema admins. And the schema admins group are the only ones that can make changes to the schema. So not only do you have to be an enterprise admin because changes you make can affect the entire forest, you also have to be in the schema admins group to give you right permissions over the schema. So it's just another layer of security, and it is one that, again, will have you pulling out your hair. I'm an enterprise admin. Why are you telling me I do not have rights to make these changes or to install this application that's modifying the schema? I'm enterprise admin. I should be able to do whatever I want. And it's just that extra layer of security to protect the schema. So you need to be in the enterprise admins group and the schema admins group to make changes to the schema.
Yeah, that one is probably the stumper for everybody that's fairly studying, at least at the beginning, not understanding when you read the definition for that enterprise admin that says, yeah, you can do anything in the entire forest that you want to be able to do. Oh, except this one thing that you can't do.
And then you get a pop-up that says, no, you can't.
Yeah, no, you can't. Yeah, and it probably is a little bit more mind-numbing or, it's blinding for what we want. Now, when we start talking about all this stuff, Mike, where do we learn more about this? I know in ITProTV library, we have shows on this. What are we particularly looking at? What exam objectives are we looking at here?
Probably 410 and 411.
Okay.
I say 410 and 411. The 70-410 class and the 70-411. We take a look at Active Directory or administration with server and identity with server. Probably those two are the big ones.
Yeah,
help you with that.
And that's actually pretty good because I think we do quite a bit of material on all of the server stuff, but at least getting into the Active Directory and trying to figure out all the things that need to be done. Those are the shows that you might want to hit in our library to make sure that you get to the place where you want to go.
Right. And I just
bring
thought those might be the numbers for the 2020 12. I can't remember if that's the 2016 content.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
740 and
740.
741.
Okay.
I think 410 and 411
Yeah.
might have been the old ones, the 2012. So, but yeah, take a look. Go into Microsoft in the library there. Look for the track for the MCSA courses, and those will be the ones, whether you want 2012 or 2016.
All right, Mike. Well, that actually brings us to this point where we have, it looks like our final question here that we have submitted overall. And let's take a look at this one as well. I need to make changes to the schema. Is there a GUI, or I always say GUI tool, that is available? Now, Mike, I'm assuming that this means that what they've actually experienced is that there's only a command line tool that they've been trying to use here. Is there a GUI tool that is available?
Who is this? Martin. Martin, that's a good question. And yes, when you start working with the schema, and if you start doing some research out there, a lot of times they will point you to tools like I'm trying to think ADSI edit, or some some command line utility to work with that and make those changes, and those will work just fine. But there's a little bit of a learning curve associated there. There is actually a GUI tool associated with the schema. You just don't see it. It's not registered by default, so it doesn't show up. And again, I talked about the schema admins group kind of being another layer of security. It's the same thing with this. They don't make that tool readily available. It doesn't show up on your tools list to where you can go, oh, look, Active Directory schema, and start going through there and accidentally making changes. They make it very, not difficult, but they make it to where you have to go through certain steps to be able to work with and modify the schema. Again, because if we said, it's just so important. So the key here is there's no built-in tool. Well, I say there's no pre-built console. Right? There's not going to be an Active Directory users and computers type tool pre-built for you, but there is a snap-in available. So we'll create our blank Microsoft Management Console, or MMC, and then we'll add the schema snap-in, and then just save that as a tool. And we can add it to our various menus and shortcut places and things like that. But the trick here is understanding that you have to register the schema management DLL before it will even show up in your list. And let's take a look at my screen here. We'll do another little demonstration. I am making sure, let me see, I'm still on my domain controller. And if we go to our tools menu, I'll see those pre-built consoles like sites and services, users and computers, group policy, all of this good stuff for managing Active Directory. What I don't see is anything related to the schema. So let's go to our start menu down here. Actually, they've changed this, Ronnie. This is driving me crazy. If you go to your start menu and type MMC, it doesn't pull up the blank console anymore.
Oh, that is
unusual. It just pulls up a random, and this will change. So what you'll do, if you're used to going to that like I am, just do a run and then do MMC, and it'll pull up your blank Microsoft Management Console. And then if I want to add a snap-in to provide functionality in this console, File, Add Remove Snap-in, and you'll see here that I don't see anything to do with the schema, right? There's no Active Directory schema. If I take a look at the S's, and there's nothing to do with schema down here. And this is what I was saying. You have to register this DLL before that'll work. So let me pull up we'll do PowerShell here. You would need administrative rights to register this DLL. And the command is reg, and I always get this backwards. It's SVR or SRV. We'll find out. regserve32, and that is the command. All right, so we'll double check that. I always get the VR or the RV backwards. So it's regserve32 space, and then the name of this DLL that you want to register, which in our case is schmmgmt.dll. That sounds crazy, but if you think about what it stands for, you'll be able to remember.
Schema management. Yeah.
Schema management, right? And the one that gets people is there are two M's there, right?
Yeah.
schmmgmt.dll. So hit enter, and I'll get a message. The register server and schema management DLL succeeded, right? So we'll click OK, minimize PowerShell. Now I might have to refresh this console. Let's see. We'll go File, Add Remove Snap-in, and nope. There we go, Active Directory Schema. Now that I've registered that, it shows up in my list. I'll click Add to add that to my console. I'll click OK, and there's my Active Directory schema, right? And assuming that I am in the Enterprise Admins group, and if I want to make changes, I would need to be in the Schema Admins group as well. But now I've got a tool that I can use to work with it, right? This is where maybe I want to define a new attribute. We're a shoe company, and we give away a pair of shoes for our users or our employees every Christmas. Well, there's nowhere in Active Directory for me in the users' accounts properties to track shoe size. So I could add an attribute, right? That's probably a silly example, but just to show you, that's the kind of thing we can do. But that's what the schema does. It defines all of the classes of objects that we can create. The fact that I can create a new user is because there is a user class in here. So I can get down to user, right? This is what defines what a user is. So when you right-click new user, this is how Active Directory knows how to create a new user, because it's all defined here in the schema. And this is the tool that I would use to work with the schema in a nice, friendly way. And now that I've created it, I don't want to have to go through that. I only have to register that DLL once on this particular server. If I was going to do this on a different server, I would have to register that snap in over there. But I only have to register it once. I don't have to register it every time I need to use that. If I close this console, there's still no built-in tool. So I'd have to create a new blank console, and I'd have to add the snap in every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say File, Save, or Save As, either one. And it's going to put it by default in my administrative tools. I could choose wherever I wanted to place that. Maybe I'll dump it out on our desktop just so we can find it. I'll call it the AD schema. I'll click Save, close it, and now on my desktop, I have a new console. Anytime I want to work with the schema, I can access that. So to work with the schema in the GUI, you can do it. You just have to remember that the tool's not available by default. You're going to have to register the snap-in or the DLL. Then you have to go create your own blank console and add that schema snap-in to it, and then save it. So you have to do it every time.
Well, Mike, thank you for helping us out with that last question as well. All these questions that seem to be directed towards Active Directory, remember that in the ITProTV library, there are plenty of shows that help you to get started in Active Directory, as well as, of course, in our Microsoft Windows Server series, whichever one you choose, whether it's the 2012 or 2016. There's plenty of material out there for you to be able to jump into and dive into and begin to learn more about the idea of Active Directory. So take advantage of that, because, well, that's where we want you to be. Now, don't forget, even though we're actually ending this particular episode of Ask Me Anything, it doesn't mean you have to stop submitting your questions. You can continue to go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll go ahead and queue them up for whoever's actually next. Or if we actually need to, we'll answer them, of course, by hashtagging Ask Me Anything, and that will also get you an answer if you need that as well. Okay, so Mike, thank you again for helping us as we've taken a look at all these questions, and also thank you for joining us as well. So everybody, signing off for Ask Me Anything, and for Mike Rodgick, I'm Ronnie Wong. Everybody take care and have a great day.
Enjoying Ask Me Anything? Then be sure to check out our other podcast, Technado, where we take a look at the most interesting tech news stories from the week and interviews from people in the industry. Here's the latest episode, and here's the full playlist. And as always, be sure to subscribe to ITProTV's channel. ITProTV!